Hello, and welcome once more to another Sunday reflection. I've lost count now as to how many of these I've done, but I am looking forward to sharing them a little more in the future. And I'm delighted that my new colleague has arrived in the circuit, and you will be able to see her do some of these reflections as we move forward. And who knows, I may even persuade some of our local preachers to do some of these reflections as I begin to get out and about, taking some services as we get back to worship from September, albeit slowly in only some of our chapels. But it will be, it'll keep me busier than usual, that's for sure. So it'll be nice to share some of these with other people. However, you're still stuck with me for this week. So here we go on a delightful bank holiday weekend with the weather to match, I think, is probably what we were expecting. So you may be familiar with the statement from the comedienne Dawn French, that famous Dawn French from that hilariously funny, or hilariously funny to me anyway, TV series, The Vicar of Dibley. Well, her statement that she made some 13 years ago declared at the time that she knew that she was going to die soon. Despite having no physical ailment to speak of, she bought a house in Cornwall to be her final resting place. Her words, as reported in the Times at the time, were this: "I've never thought I'd live to be very old. I've always felt that. So by 50, I want to be down there," meaning Cornwall. "I'm not ill. I'm very fit. In fact, I don't feel gloomy about it. I'm resigned to it. I don't know why I feel so sure. I said to my brother when I was about 6. Now, I don't know if you remember this all those years ago, but many people were absolutely flabbergasted by her statement and her conviction that her end was nigh, and it certainly hit the headlines. Now we can see, can't we, some 13 years later, that she was wrong. And I have no doubt that there would have been people, those that were very close to the actress, those who love her deeply, who probably would have rebuked her for such talk. We don't like to talk about death very much, it seems, certainly not in this country. Or indeed, we don't like to listen to others talk about death. How many children respond when their parents mention making a will or planning for their funeral with those familiar words: "Don't be ridiculous. There is plenty of time yet for that. You're not old. Don't talk so silly." Most of us do not know when we will die, and being prepared is not such a bad thing. Being a minister, I would say that, of course, because I have sat with many families flung into disordered heartbreak when a loved one dies, leaving no will and no instructions. And on top of the grief and the loss, there is helplessness as to what to do for the best. A small few do know when their time is near, and I cannot begin to describe how humbling it is to sit with someone and plan their funeral with them. And it truly is a remarkable gift to their loved ones to know that everything is not only sorted, but the person that they have loved so dearly has their wishes fulfilled by those that are left behind. Jesus, even by first century standards, was not an old man. He never lived on earth as a human longer than 33 years. And yet, in the Gospel passage set for Sunday the 30th of August, he is talking about his death. And those who love him are very uncomfortable at their friend's pronouncement, especially one particular disciple. So join me once more as we turn to Matthew chapter 16, verses 21 to 28. And I am reading from my trusty New Living Translation. Doesn't make it better than any other translation, just somehow the one that I like at the moment. So turn to your Bible if you have it with you. Matthew chapter 16, beginning at verse 21. From then on, Jesus began to tell his disciples plainly that he had to go to Jerusalem, and he told them what would happen to him there. He would suffer at the hands of the leaders and the leading priests and the teachers of religious law. He would be killed, and he would be raised on the third day. But Peter took him aside and corrected him. "Heaven forbid, Lord," he said, "this will never happen to you." Jesus turned to Peter and said, "Get away from me, Satan. You are a dangerous trap to me. You are seeing things merely from a human point of view and not from God's." Then Jesus said to the disciples, "If any of you wants to be my follower, you must put aside your selfish ambition, shoulder your cross, and follow me. If you try to keep your life for yourself, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for me, you will find true life. And how do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul in the process? Is anything worth more than your soul? For I, the Son of Man, will come in the glory of my Father with his angels and will judge all people according to their deeds. And I assure you that some of you standing here right now will not die before you see me, the Son of Man, coming in my kingdom." Oh, excuse me. Should have got a glass of water, shouldn't I, before I started? So that's the set passage for Sunday, the 30th of August. Last week, Peter was riding high. He had hit the nail on the head when he answered Jesus' question, "Who do you say I am?" But as we unpacked that passage together last week, by confessing that Jesus was the Messiah, Peter and the other disciples thought that Jesus would be a conquering military rescuer who would lead an army against the Romans. This understanding would have left the disciples on a high, bursting to tell others, even though Jesus ordered them not to. They would have been full of excitement, full of hope and expectation, wondering what was going to happen next. But what happens next is that Jesus begins to talk some nonsense about his death. Or it seems nonsense to them. That is, it makes no sense. For what good could come from Jesus' suffering at the hands of the leaders and the leading priests and the teachers of religious law and then being killed? That's not going to help the Jews living under Roman rule, who are oppressed by their rulers. How will Jesus rescue rescue them like that. If he dies, all is lost. Surely. We can imagine all of the disciples struggling with hearing these words from Jesus, feeling confused, unsettled, perhaps even a bit angry or betrayed. But it is Peter. Peter, the impulsive one. And Peter, still glowing from the praise of Jesus from the last conversation, who takes Jesus to one side. Don't be ridiculous. That is never going to happen to you. What on earth are you talking about? God forbid. Don't be silly. You've got years yet. We don't get all the conversation, of course, but we can probably fill in the blanks as I have begun to do here. Peter probably thinks he is being loving, caring, supportive, encouraging, a real friend offering reassurance and positivity. I am mindful, when I think about it, that Peter homes in on the suffering and the death bit, and he ignores the raised on the third day bit of Jesus's words. But we do that, don't we? We only hear the bad bits, instantly latching on to any negativity and trying to put a positive spin on it. This will never happen to you, Jesus. Don't talk such way. Get away from me, Satan. Jesus turns on Peter immediately with harsh hitting, shocking, crushing words. Imagine the hurt, the humiliation, the bewilderment of hearing the tone of Jesus' voice as he lashes out at Peter with his tongue. We have a saying in Cornwall, where I'm from, that he was cut to the quick. And Peter truly was cut to the quick, annihilated with words from the one person he loved so very deeply. Poor Peter. I feel his pain. I bet the others were relieved that they had kept quiet. You are seeing things merely from a human point of view, says Jesus. He is right, they are. For how can they see things any other way? Seeing from God's viewpoint is almost impossible to do. And here in this moment, they have no chance. But Jesus tries to make them understand. To follow me, you must put away your selfish ambition. Shoulder your cross and follow me. Now we are back here to kingdom values versus worldly values, aren't we? It's a common theme. We've been talking about it for a few weeks now. Shoulder your cross. Shoulder your cross. That might be a strange saying, at least to us, perhaps. But for those disciples, hearing such words about shouldering their cross to follow Jesus would have meant that they had an instant understanding. For crucifixion was a common Roman method of execution, where the condemned criminals had to carry their cross through the streets to the execution site, something they would have witnessed far too often. So the imagery, that imagery that's flung up by the use of this saying, implied that following Jesus meant a true commitment, the risk of death, and there was no turning back. The possibility of losing their lives was very real. This was a profoundly serious conversation. Being a disciple was not to be taken lightly. It was all or nothing. The world of the disciples, the time that they lived in, that world considered humility, suffering, and weakness as a failure. Our world today still arguably considers humility, suffering, and weakness as a failure. Therefore, humans, ordinary people like you and me, we often make choices based on this worldview. A worldview where often there is no understanding or indeed no expectation of an afterlife, merely what you can get out of this life. But here in this passage, in this conversation, Jesus talks of an afterlife, a place for the soul, an indication that this life is merely the introduction, perhaps, to eternity, and the choices that we make in this life will have huge implications for what is to come. Now, these words of Jesus, they're heavy, aren't they? They're heavy words. And they're not necessarily easy ones to understand. Did the disciples grasp his meaning? Well, clearly not. For if we read on, in fact, we can read right on to the end of the account of the Gospels, we will still see right up to the very end that those disciples were hoping for a revolution and a rescue from Roman rule. And this short passage is no easier for us to understand, for we must make a huge leap of faith. A huge leap of faith, and believe that there is something beyond this life. Something beyond this life that is worth risking everything for. I would like to have known what the disciples talked about with each other after this conversation. I want to know how Peter was after this. How was he? Did he sulk? Did he just shrug his shoulders and think, oh dear, I caught Jesus in a bad mood, didn't I? What happened afterwards? The Bible is frustratingly short, isn't it? You know, there's so much more details that if only we could access them, but we can't. We have edited highlights. They were trying to make sense of things that were happening around them, the disciples, trying to make sense of the words of Jesus, just as we are today. We are trying to make sense of our world that we are living in right now. And as we read our scriptures, we too are trying to make sense of those and then reconciling them to our world and what it means for us. Just when you think you know exactly what is going to happen in your life and you are content with your life, things can change in an instant. Peter and the other disciples, they certainly wanted a better way. They wanted a kinder way, a fairer way, a more equal way of living, as people do today. Jesus wanted to show them that those values that they are seeking, kingdom values, we would call them, they cannot be achieved through violence, through power, and through domination. But it always feels much harder to shoulder the cross and see things from God's point of view rather than the world's point of view, doesn't it? It did then and it does now. As with all aspects of faith, some things do make sense and some things remain a mystery. Peter and the disciples, they kept going, even when many things made little sense to them, especially the words of Jesus. And that's enough for me. I can't say that I understand everything. And even though I love studying the Bible, and I find it absolutely fascinating, as a person of faith, I always have more questions than answers. Far more questions than answers. But as I get older, I find I am content to keep going with the hope that just occasionally I might glimpse things from God's point of view. And some things will probably always remain a mystery, and that is okay with me. So what about you? It was okay with Peter and the disciples to keep going, even when they had little understanding. For they had faith and they believed in Jesus. Being a person of faith means that it's just that. Sometimes we keep going because that's all there is to it. If we wait until we think we understand everything, we'll never get there. So what about you? Are you content to accept some things as a mystery and just keep going? I hope so. It's been good to share with you once again. And I do pray that as we begin to go back to our churches, that you will keep enjoying some of the things that you've explored and discovered through lockdown. I know many of you were not users of the internet before, and now you are. That's a good thing in many ways. And we will keep these reflections going. So if you feel that that's something that you would like to continue doing, then we will keep them going as long as they are welcome. So see you again soon, and take care of yourself. God bless.